Before she could respond, Clayton abruptly raised his hand and struck her across the cheek. The blow wasn't hard, but it was humiliating, like slapping a child. The coffee slipped from her hands, spilling onto the floor in a brown puddle. Silence fell over the hallway. Several attorneys and aides nearby froze, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Before we begin the story, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and stay tuned for tomorrow's incredible episode. Now, let's dive into today's story. In the Dallas County Courthouse, the air was thick with tension. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of attendees whispering among themselves, while the scent of old varnish on the floor mingled with a faint aroma of coffee from someone's travel mug. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn parquet floor. It was a typical morning for most present, lawyers flipping through files, jurors stifling yawns, and journalists waiting for a headline. But for Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman from Texas, this day was destined to be one that changed everything. Jasmine sat at the defense table, her posture straight but not stiff. Her dark blue suit fit her figure perfectly, and a thin silver pendant, a gift from her mother, glinted at her neck. She always wore it on days like this. She was representing her local community in a lawsuit against a construction company accused of illegally demolishing a historic neighborhood. The case had drawn public attention. People had lost their homes, and rumors swirled that the corporation had bribed half the local officials. Jasmine knew she was fighting not just for homes, but for the public's faith in a system that had repeatedly let them down. Judge Edward Clayton, a man with graying temples and deep lines across his forehead, entered the courtroom with a heavy gait. His black robe swayed as he took his seat, his expression cold and distant. In Dallas, Clayton had a reputation. Some saw him as strict but fair. Others believed he could be swayed for the right price. Jasmine had heard the whispers, but she didn't let them influence her. She believed in facts, the law, and dialogue, even when everything around her screamed corruption. The hearing began with the corporation's attorney, Mr. Lawrence, whose smug smile irritated even the jurors. He waved around documents, claiming the demolition was legal, and the community was simply clinging to the past. Jasmine listened silently, taking notes. Her pen scratched loudly across the paper as she underlined each contradiction in his statements. When her turn came, Jasmine stood, adjusting her blazer. Her voice was calm, but carried through every corner of the room. Your Honor, members of the jury, we are here today not just because of bricks and beams. We are here because this is about people. Families who built their lives in this neighborhood for decades. A history that can't be measured in dollars. The company claims its actions were legal, but allow me to present documents they conveniently forgot to mention. She placed a folder of papers in front of her, but didn't have time to open it. Miss Crockett, I've already seen your documents, Judge Clayton interrupted sharply. Don't waste the court's time with what we already know. The room froze. Jasmine felt her anger tightening in her chest, but her face remained calm. With all due respect, Your Honor, these documents have not yet been reviewed. They contain evidence of violations that, enough. Clayton barked, his voice cutting like a blade. I said we're moving on. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Journalists leaned over their notebooks. Jurors exchanged glances. Jasmine felt the blood pulsing in her temples, but she forced herself to breathe. Don't react impulsively, she reminded herself. Her mother had always said, real strength is keeping a cool head when everyone expects you to explode. She sat down, but her eyes never left the judge. There was something in his tone, the way he avoided her gaze, that confirmed her worst suspicions. This wasn't just a bad day for Clayton. It was something more. During the break, Jasmine stood in the hallway holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The air smelled of damp carpet and someone's overly sweet perfume. She was scrolling through messages on her phone when she sensed someone approaching. Looking up, she saw Clayton striding toward her, his face flushed and eyes blazing with anger. You think you can walk into my courtroom and put on a circus, he hissed, stopping just a step away from her. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, her voice calm. I'm just doing my job, Judge. Same as you. His lips twisted into a smile that was more of a sneer. Your job? You're digging where you shouldn't, Crockett. If you don't stop, you'll regret it. Before she could respond, Clayton abruptly raised his hand and struck her across the cheek. The blow wasn't hard, but it was humiliating, like slapping a child. The coffee slipped from her hands, spilling onto the floor in a brown puddle. Silence fell over the hallway. Several attorneys and aides nearby froze, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Jasmine felt the burn on her cheek, but her gaze didn't flinch. She stared straight at Clayton, and there was no fear or rage in her eyes, only cold determination. She slowly wiped a drop of coffee from her blazer and said quietly, "You just made a big mistake." Clayton scoffed, turned on his heel, and headed back toward the courtroom. But he hadn't taken 10 steps when 2 security officers appeared at the end of the hallway. One of them, a stocky man with graying mustache, held a radio. "Judge Clayton, you need to come with us," he said in a voice that left no room for argument. Clayton stopped, his confidence vanishing. "What? This is ridiculous. I'm a judge." "We received a report, sir," the younger officer said with a tense expression. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." The hallway buzzed with whispers as Clayton was escorted away in handcuffs. Jasmine stood watching him go. Her heart was pounding, but her thoughts were clear. She knew this was only the beginning. That slap wasn't just an insult. It was a signal that the system she was trying to change was ready to fight back with everything it had. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't one to back down. The courthouse corridor buzzed like a hive. Journalists frantically tapped messages into their phones, their fingers flickering across screens, and the crowd's whispers merged into a low hum, like wind before a storm. Jasmine Crockett stood by the window, watching as security escorted Judge Clayton through a side door. His robe hung loosely from his shoulders, and the face that had been smug and self-assured minutes earlier was now pale, sweat beading at his temples. The handcuffs flashed under the overhead lights as he glanced around, searching for anyone who might support him. But no one met his gaze. Jasmine clenched her fists, feeling her nails dig into her palms. The slap still burned on her cheek, but the real pain was deeper, not just an insult to her, but to everything she stood for. Clayton hadn't simply raised a hand against her. He represented a system that had choked justice in Dallas for years. She knew if he walked free now, it would send a message to all the others. Corruption could go unpunished. She wouldn't allow that. Clayton had to go to prison, and she would do whatever it took to make that happen. "Jasmine, are you okay?" A gentle voice pulled her from her thoughts. It was Linda Morgan, a local newspaper journalist in her 60s. Her gray hair was tied in a neat bun, and her eyes held a mix of concern and professional curiosity. She held a notebook, but hadn't started writing. Not yet. Jasmine forced a smile, though it didn't come easily. "I'm okay, Linda. Just trying to process." "Process? Girl, you just watched a judge get let out in cuffs after hitting you." Linda lowered her voice, stepping closer. "This isn't just a story. It's an earthquake. What are you planning to do?" Jasmine looked at her, determination flaring in her eyes. "I want him held accountable. Not just for this," she touched her cheek, "but for every ruling he sold. For every home demolished in silence. For every person who lost faith in the law because of him." Linda nodded slowly, her gaze growing more serious. "You know this won't be easy. Clayton's got connections. Cops, politicians, even some media. He's not a lone wolf." "I know," Jasmine said quietly. "But if not me, then who?" Linda held her gaze for a moment, then gave a faint smile. "All right, I'm with you. But be careful. Men like Clayton don't just strike with their hands." Jasmine nodded, feeling a warm surge in her chest. She wasn't alone, and that gave her strength. That evening, Jasmine sat in her apartment in downtown Dallas. City lights flickered outside the window. Cars buzzed below, mixing with the distant bark of a dog. Her home was modest, wooden floors, a bookshelf cluttered with papers, and a small couch topped with an embroidered pillow, a gift from her mother. On the table sat a plate with half-eaten dinner, chicken, and rice gone cold, and a glass of water with bubbles dancing inside. She was flipping through documents for the case against a construction company, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Clayton. The slap was only the tip of the iceberg. In recent months, she'd received anonymous threats, and her office had been broken into twice. Someone didn't want her digging deeper, and now she was sure Clayton was the key to the whole web. Her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. The screen lit up with a name, Derek Wilson, her longtime friend and the lawyer helping with the case. "Jasmine, have you seen the news?" His voice was tense, almost agitated. "Not yet." "What's up?" She turned on the TV and switched to the local channel. A report from the courtroom filled the screen. The camera showed Clayton being led away in handcuffs, while a voiceover described the unprecedented incident. But then the tone of the report shifted sharply. The anchor began talking about an overreaction and a possible provocation by Congresswoman Crockett. Jasmine's jaw tightened. "They're already flipping the story on me?" she said, eyes glued to the screen. "This is just the beginning," Derek replied. "I just spoke with a source in the department. Clayton's been released on bail. Someone paid $100,000 in cash within an hour of his arrest." $800,000? Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her voice quiet but sharp. "Where does a judge get that kind of money? Or someone willing to pay it that fast?" "That's what I'm trying to find out," Derek said. "But listen, Jasmine, you've got to be careful. Someone with serious resources is backing him. And they're not happy about what happened today." "I'm not backing down, Derek." Her voice was firm as steel. "If they think they can scare me, they're dead wrong." "I know you won't," he sighed. "But let's be smart about this. I've set up a meeting with the DA tomorrow morning. We can file an official complaint against Clayton, not just for the assault, but on corruption suspicions. Do you have any evidence?" Jasmine looked at the folder on the table. Inside were bank records she'd received from an anonymous source, transfers to offshore companies linked to the construction firm. It wasn't enough yet to lock him up, but the trail pointed to Clayton. "I have something," she said, "but it's not enough to put him away. We need a witness, someone who knows how he operates." "Then we'll find one," Derek replied. "But until tomorrow, don't do anything on your own, okay? Just try to rest." Jasmine scoffed. "Rest? Derek, I haven't slept properly in 3 months." He chuckled, but the laugh was strained. "Just remember sometimes, you're a human, not a machine." She hung up, but peace didn't come. Faces swirled in her mind. Clayton's smug grin, the corporation's attorney looking at her like she was an insect, and the people from the community, elderly Mrs. Johnson crying about her home being demolished without warning, young Trevor losing his family business to rezoning. Their stories pushed Jasmine forward, even when her legs trembled with exhaustion. She walked to the window and breathed in the cool night air. Dallas sprawled before her, a city she both loved and hated. A city where justice was possible, but only if you fought for it to the bitter end. Suddenly, her phone rang again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Crockett." The voice was low, with a faint tremor. "My name is Emma. I used to be Judge Clayton's assistant. I know what he did, and I want to talk." Jasmine froze, her heart pounding. "Emma, how did you get my number?" "That doesn't matter." The voice grew quieter, nearly a whisper. "Let's meet tomorrow. But only you. No one else." "Where?" Jasmine gripped the phone tighter. "The Blue Rose Cafe on Oak Street. 10 a.m. and please be careful." The line went dead. Jasmine stood there, staring at the dark screen. Her thoughts buzzed like a swarm of bees. Emma could be the key to everything or a trap. But it was too late to back down. The night before the meeting with Emma was sleepless. Jasmine lay on the sofa, staring at the cracks in the ceiling of her apartment. The clock on the wall ticked, measuring seconds that stretched like an eternity. She replayed the conversation with Clayton's mysterious assistant in her mind, searching for hidden motives in her words. Could Emma be sincere? Or was this another attempt to lure her into a trap? Jasmine knew she was taking a risk, but stopping was impossible. Justice for the community, for Mrs. Johnson, for Trevor, and for herself, demanded this step. By morning, Dallas greeted her with a gray sky and light rain, leaving droplets on the windows. The Blue Rose Cafe on Oak Street was a small establishment with a faded sign and the smell of freshly brewed coffee seeping through the doors. Inside, conversations hummed, spoons clinked against cups, and an old jukebox in the corner quietly played Frank Sinatra's melody. Jasmine chose a table by the window, ordering black coffee to warm her hands. Her eyes carefully watched the entrance. At 10:03, the door opened, and a woman in her 40s entered the cafe. Her blonde hair was tied in a messy ponytail, and dark circles rested under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept in weeks. She wore a gray coat that seemed too big for her, and in her hands she carried a worn bag. Jasmine immediately recognized her as someone who was afraid but had gathered all her courage to come. "Emma." Jasmine called softly. The woman flinched but nodded and sat across from her. Her fingers nervously gripped the strap of her bag. "You're Jasmine Crockett," she said, as if confirming this to herself. "I saw you on TV. You. Don't back down." "I'm trying." Jasmine smiled to ease the tension. "Why did you want to meet?" Emma glanced over her shoulder, as if checking if anyone was watching. Then she leaned in closer and whispered, "I worked in Clayton's office for 5 years. I saw everything, how he took money, how he signed decisions before hearings. The construction company. They paid him hundreds of thousands through shell companies. I have evidence." Jasmine felt her heart skip a beat. "What evidence?" Emma pulled a flash drive from her bag and placed it on the table, covering it with her palm. "There are recordings. Phone calls, emails, even a few documents with his signature. I've been copying them for months. At first, just in case, but after yesterday. After what he did to you, I realized I can't stay silent anymore." Jasmine carefully took the flash drive, her fingers barely trembling. "Why are you doing this? You're risking everything." Emma lowered her eyes, her voice softening. "I have a daughter. She's 15. I don't want her growing up in a city where people like Clayton control everything. And I'm ashamed I stayed quiet for so long." Jasmine nodded, feeling warmth spread in her chest. She saw in Emma not just a witness, but someone who, like herself, had finally found the strength to say enough. "I'll make sure the evidence gets to the right hands," Jasmine said. "But you need to be careful. If Clayton finds out—" "I know," Emma interrupted, "but I'm tired of being afraid." They agreed that Emma would lay low, while Jasmine handed the flash drive to Derek and the prosecutor. When Emma left, her figure disappeared into the rainy haze, and Jasmine remained sitting, clutching the flash drive in her pocket. This was her chance, not just to take down Clayton, but to tear apart the corruption network that was suffocating Dallas. The following days were a whirlwind of events. Jasmine passed the evidence to Derek, who in turn contacted the district attorney, an honest but cautious woman named Catherine Blake. Catherine listened to them, reviewed the files, and agreed to open an official investigation against Clayton. But she warned, "This won't be quick, Jasmine. He has protectors, people who won't want him to talk. And the media is already spinning a story against you." She was right. Local channels exploded with headlines. Congresswoman Crockett accuses judge without evidence. Was the courtroom argument a planned provocation? Social media buzzed, splitting between those supporting Jasmine and those calling her an opportunist seeking fame. Jasmine read the comments, feeling anger mixed with helplessness, but every time she wanted to respond, she remembered her mother's words, "Speak with actions, not words." She decided to act. Instead of arguing with the media, Jasmine went to the people. That week, she organized a meeting at the community center of the district that had been affected by the demolition. The hall was packed, elderly couples, young families, activists with posters. The smell of coffee and homemade cookies filled the air, and the laughter of children from the next room added warmth. Jasmine stood before the microphone, her voice calm but penetrating to the heart. I know how painful it is to lose a home. I know how frightening it is when the system we trust turns against us. But I am here to tell you, we are not alone. We can change this together. Not with shouting, not with fists, but with truth. Mrs. Johnson, sitting in the front row, wiped a tear. Trevor, holding an old photograph of his store, nodded. People were listening, and Jasmine saw in their eyes what she had been looking for: hope. After the speech, Linda Morgan approached her with a recorder. You gave them something more than promises, the journalist said. I'll write about this. And about the evidence, if you allow me. Jasmine hesitated for a moment. Write it, Linda. But protect your source. Linda's article appeared the next day with the headline, Is Judge Clayton hiding dirty secrets? She didn't name Emma, but detailed Clayton's connections to the construction company. The article sparked a fire. Other media outlets picked up the story, and soon the pressure was too much for the prosecution to ignore. Clayton was called in for questioning, and his offshore accounts were frozen. 2 months passed. Jasmine sat in the courtroom, the same one where it all began. This time, she was not the lawyer, but the witness. Clayton stood before a new judge, his robe long, replaced with a wrinkled suit. Prosecutor Catherine read out the charges: bribery, abuse of power, assault. Emma's evidence, backed by testimonies from other court employees who had dared to speak out, was undeniable. Clayton pleaded guilty to assault but denied the corruption charges. However, the jury, seeing the recordings of his conversations, delivered their verdict: guilty. When the judge announced the sentence, 7 years in prison, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Jasmine sat quietly, her hands resting on her knees. She didn't feel triumph, only relief. Clayton was only a part of the system, but his fall was a signal. No one was untouchable. After the hearing, Jasmine stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The rain had stopped, and the sun pierced through the clouds, casting golden reflections on the wet asphalt. Linda was waiting for her with a camera. So what now, Congresswoman? She asked, smiling. Jasmine looked at the city that stretched before her. She thought of Emma, who had started a new life in another state. Of Mrs. Johnson, who received compensation for her home. Of Trevor, who was planning to open a new business. And of those still waiting for justice. Now we keep going, she said. One step at a time. She turned toward the car, feeling the light breeze touch her cheek, the same one that remembered the blow. But now, that touch was different, as if the city was whispering to her, You did it.